let's turn to our theme for this evening. I saw the title for these two seminar periods was Faith and Spiritual Power. So I always try to be obedient. So I really sought the Lord on what I could say about faith and spiritual power. And one of the scriptures that came to me is one that you might not be familiar with. We just glanced at it. It's found in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, and verse 32. It describes prophetically a time when evil is going to be tremendously powerful and almost sweep everything before it. But it describes in that passage one kind of person who will not be overwhelmed with the flood of evil, but who will be triumphant and active and successful in the midst of evil. From my point of observation, which is, as you've heard, nearly 70 years of very active involvement in the work of God and the people of God, traveling in many, many nations, having a certain kind of background experience of situations which probably are not known to many of you, I find that the tide of evil in the world is rising with amazing rapidity. I have to keep bearing in mind that I'm older than most of you, but when I think of what England was like when I grew up there between World War I and World War II, the security, the stability, the sense of accepted values, I can hardly believe the changes that have taken place. I've lived now for more than 20 years, most of the time in the United States. In those 20 years, the changes that have taken place, I could only describe them as cataclysmic. The changes in morality, in relationships, in family life, the upsurge of the divorce rate, the open flaunting of wickedness, the form of homosexuality, violence, perverted lifestyles. It really, when I look back, I have to say to myself, did all that happen in just 20 years? Then I think of one of the countries that I've been close to over the years, the country of Sweden. I first went to Sweden as a young minister in 1947, and I have to say it was the most God-fearing nation that I had ever visited. The people lined up in the streets for the church services on Sunday morning, and you could go out on Saturday night and feel the sense of God's presence in the streets of Stockholm. I don't know whether any nation has ever declined morally so rapidly as Sweden. I talked to a young Swedish journalist a couple of years ago who interviewed me. He was probably about 30 years old. When I told him my impressions of his own land when I first visited it before he was born, he really couldn't believe me. I mean, he didn't question me, but he said, I cannot believe that my own nation was ever like that. And then, when I think of what's happened to the British Empire, I come from a family of empire builders. Every male member of my family that I've ever known was an empire builder. The only problem today is there's no empire to build. And when I think of the disintegration of the British Empire, and I'm not suggesting that was a historical disaster, believe me, but I'm just simply saying the amazingly rapid change without defeat in war between 1948 and today in Britain. Whoever imagined that you would arrive at London Airport and be greeted by signs in Arabic? I mean, it was so remote from the Britain that I knew before World War II. I'm not suggesting that all these changes are necessarily harmful. I'm just pointing out that we live in a period of incessant, violent, and I think uncontrollable change. And I personally believe that the scene that's depicted at the close of the book of Daniel, which I'm not going to speak about, but I simply say that I believe that scene could be a description of the world before the end of this present century. And so I want to suggest to you that the words I'm going to read, they're very brief, are very relevant. Daniel 11:32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he, that's the Antichrist, shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. The phrase that I want to focus on is the people who know their God shall be strong. The New King James Version that I'm reading says shall do great exploits. I think the New International Version says shall firmly resist him. The Hebrew simply says shall do. It's like a blank check. You can write in anything. There's nothing that the people who know their God will not be able to do. And I believe ultimately that's the only secure source of strength and power that's available to any of us, is the knowledge of God. And as I travel around, and I travel very widely, and I'm in contact with Christians from almost every background, right from the Roman Catholic through the other extreme, whatever that may be, if you want to call it Pentecostal, although that's like the circle going around and meeting itself again. But anyhow, my observation is that most of God's people are interested in things and have relatively little time for God. Now, there are always outstanding exceptions to that statement, but basically, you talk about power, people's ears open. You talk about healing, and they will come almost endlessly. You can talk about other dramatic aspects of Christian ministry, and people are ready to listen. But I hear very, very little that's really being taught about God himself. I want to suggest to you this evening that anything that is not rooted in God is going to be swept away by the floods of evil. When I read the word power in the title for the seminar, I thought to myself, the mere desire for power can be extraordinarily dangerous. I think it's the psychiatrist or psychoanalyst Jung who says that the quest for power is the main motivation of human beings. I'm not saying that necessarily is exactly true, but there is something in almost every person, and it starts in early childhood, that wants power. I believe that's placed in man by the Creator, because man was created to rule. The problem with unregenerate, fallen man is he wants the power and he wants to rule without meeting the conditions. So tonight I want to speak about the knowledge of God. It's a vast subject, and I have to say I feel inadequate even to begin with it. But on the other hand, if I don't begin, I'll never get any further. So I would like to turn now to Exodus chapter 19. Which, and I'm going to read the first 6 verses. Now, these verses are the message that God gave to Moses for the children of Israel after he had redeemed them from slavery in Egypt, brought them out by tremendous miracles, and brought them to the foot of Mount Sinai, where he proposed to enter into a covenant with them. And here God states rather succinctly the purpose of Israel's redemption. Now, As I read these verses, those of you who are familiar with the New Testament will recall that the same words are quoted by the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, and are applied to all who believe in Jesus Christ. So that these words are not merely relevant to Israel after their redemption out of Egypt, but they are no less relevant to believing Christians today. And I'd like to suggest to you right at the outset that for the most part, God's purposes for Israel as revealed here never were fulfilled. Some individuals, men like Daniel, grasped their calling. But I would say for the most part, Israel never really discovered the purpose of their redemption. And since they did not do so, God simply restated the same purpose for the Church of Jesus Christ. And I would offer this comment, that sin and Satan can delay the outworking of God's purposes, but never ultimately prevent it. So if it doesn't work the first time, God does not give up and say, well, Satan won that round. He simply waits until he finds a people that will do what he intends to get done. And I have come to this conviction that what God intends to be done will be done. The question is not whether it will be done, the question is who will do it. And I think for you and me the question is, will we find our destiny in God, or will we make the same mistake that Israel made and never fully comprehend or work out the purpose of our redemption? Having said that, let me read these words. In the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the desert of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. This is a message now for the whole people of Israel from God himself through his mediator Moses. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So there is an outline of what God intended to be Israel's destiny. I would like to look at the outline of what God says and then go back to the first point, which I believe is the one that Israel missed, and I believe it's the one that Christians today are in equal danger of missing. Going back to verse 4, you've seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings. I think that's the miraculous power of God displayed in Israel's redemption. That's the eagle's wings. And brought you to myself. Now that's what I want to dwell on this evening. That God primarily redeemed Israel to bring them to himself. Then he went on to outline the rest of his purpose. In the Hebrew language, that phrase, to myself, is just the shortest possible word, li. And I think what has happened to the Jewish people is they've just missed out that word, basically, in reading. And I think though the phrase is longer in English, multitudes of Christians are in danger of doing the same thing. God's primary purpose in redemption is always that, to bring his people to himself. Everything else is secondary. God then went on to speak about his covenant. He went on to give them the law. He had given them the promise of a land to inherit. I find that the Jewish people then and today, to some extent, are excited about the law. Orthodox Jews, the one word that dominates all their thinking is the word Torah, which is the word for law. They're excited about a covenant to a certain extent. They're definitely excited about the land. But I find few anywhere who are excited about God. See, it's like people have bypassed God and gone for the products. But God himself, they're scarcely aware of in a way. Let's look at the purposes, because we'll come back to them tomorrow, God helping us. But tonight I want to focus on the primary purpose. But let's look at what God said in verse 5. Because these words are all basic to a relationship with God. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant. Let's not read further. I think that that's the basic requirement of God with his redeemed people in every age, every dispensation. There are two things. If you will obey my voice and keep my covenant. I think if you read the book of Exodus and then also the book of Deuteronomy, you will find almost without ceasing, God says, this is what I want you to do. Obey my voice. If you come to that tremendous chapter of blessings and curses, which is the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, 68 verses, 14 verses of blessings and 54 verses of curses, you will find that the reason for blessing and cursing is very simple. If you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you. What's the condition? What's the primary condition? Diligently listen to the voice of the Lord and then do what he says. Obviously, listening to his voice is primary, because if you don't hear his voice, you won't know what he's telling you to do. But you have to listen with the attitude that you will obey what he tells you. And what are the causes of the curses? If you read that list of curses, which begins in verse 15 and goes on through verse 68, it is horrible. There is hardly anything unpleasant that isn't in that list, whether it's spiritual or emotional or physical or relational or financial. What's the reason? It's very simple. If thou wilt not diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God and do what is right. So really, in a sense, the destiny of each one of us is determined by that if. If you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God and do. My observation is that most people who diligently hearken do. The people who don't do are the ones who don't listen. That will determine your destiny. For every one of us here, the basic course that our life will take is determined by this. If we will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord our God. For how many of you is that somewhat new? You don't need to raise your hands. But I want to suggest to you that continually in religion, we tend to bypass the basic and deal with the secondary. My observation of religious people is, and it includes Christians, it's not limited to Christians, that they get so taken up with means that they lose sight of ends. You understand what I'm saying? You know what a means is? A means is something you do in order to achieve an end. But an end is something that's worthwhile for its own sake. Now, I think many churches are so taken up with means that they've even forgotten what the ends are which they're designing to achieve. I find in the New Testament that there are two great ends. Things which are valuable for themselves. And it so happens in the English language, each of them ends with the syllable ship. The first is fellowship. The second is worship. And I would suggest to you that all church activity that does not bring people into those two experiences of fellowship and worship is basically vain. It's wood, hay, and stubble. And in the day of judgment, it will be burned up. Now, you might say, well, that was the old covenant. But the new covenant is just the same. Jesus summed up in John 10:27 as briefly as it's possible to do who are the true Christians. And he didn't name the Catholics. And he didn't name the Protestants. He didn't even name the Pentecostals. You know what he said? My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. That's it. That's the basic requirement for being a Christian. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. In other words, hearing his voice and doing what he says. The picture is taken from an Oriental shepherd, and as most of you, I'm sure, are aware, an Oriental shepherd does not drive his sheep, he leads his sheep. And he leads them basically by the sound of his voice. They recognize his voice, and where they hear his voice, they go. So Jesus says, if you want to be one of my sheep, you've got to listen, recognize my voice, and act on what I tell you. See, I have spoken to large congregations where what I'm saying has come as a kind of surprise. Isn't that strange? See, it doesn't say, my sheep read the Bible. I mean, please understand, I fully endorse reading the Bible, and I read the Bible myself regularly. But it's very possible to read the Bible without hearing the voice of the Lord. It's good, but it's not sufficient. My sheep hear my voice. What is that? It's a personal relationship. There's nothing more distinctive in a personality than the voice. When my wife phones me, if we're separate, as soon as I hear the voice, I know who it is. Why? Because I know my wife. If you know a person, almost invariably you know that person's voice. If you don't recognize the voice, it's questionable whether you really know the person. See, what I'm talking about is a personal relationship with the Lord. Let's come back here. If you will indeed obey my voice. If I remember rightly, the Hebrew says it this way, and it certainly does in Deuteronomy 28. And also in Exodus 15:26. You know that great healing covenant? I am the Lord your doctor. I am the Lord that healeth thee. You're familiar with Exodus 15:26? You know the first condition for having the Lord as your doctor? If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and do. Now, I think personally, anybody who turns down the offer of the Lord's services as a personal physician is unwise. And he made himself available. Israel didn't ask for it. It was a sovereign revelation of God. If you do this, I'll be your doctor. And the first requirement is if you will listening to the voice of the Lord your God. And I've studied the theme of healing in the Bible. I had to study it because I was sick in hospital and doctors were not able to heal me, and I had just come to faith in the Lord Jesus, and I realized if I was to get out of hospital, it would have to be God's doing. So I did certain simple things. I think they're recorded in this. I'm not sure. I decided to read through the Bible and underline in blue everything related to 4 themes. The whole Bible. Healing, health, physical strength, and long life. It took me several months, but at the end, you know what I had? A blue Bible. And the one thing that was impressed more than anything else is healing depends on listening to God. See, we're going to have healing services here. I just want to say, or rather in the other auditorium, I just want to say that, and I might as well say it now, I have come to the conclusion that most Christians come to a healing service. They don't analyze it, but what they're asking for is a little patch of God's supernatural blessing on the old clothes of their own walk. And God says nobody puts a patch of new material on an old garment. Most people are not prepared to revolutionize their walk. But if you listen to the Lord, you know what will happen? Your life will be revolutionized. I could spend all this evening dealing with the blessings that result from listening to the voice of the Lord. But I began by saying that the Hebrew says, if you will listen, listening. The most emphatic way you can say something in Hebrew with a verb is to double the verb. So if you will listen, listening. Now, as I lay in my hospital bed and pondered on this fact, I said to myself, what does it mean to listen, listening? And I felt the Lord gave me this answer. You have 2 ears, a right ear and a left ear. To listen, listening is to listen to me with your right ear and your left ear. Not listen to me with your right ear and something else with your left ear. Faith comes by hearing. You know that. I'll tell you something else that comes by hearing. Unbelief. Jesus said, take heed what you hear and take heed how you hear. I just have to say frankly, the church would be revolutionized. It would become a spiritual dynamo if Christians would reverse the amount of time they spend on 2 things. Watching television and reading their Bibles. Just switch them, that's all. Give as much time to your Bible as you give to television, and as much time to television as you give to your Bible, and you will turn the earth upside down. See, I am very, very careful what I listen to. I have a mind that was highly trained, and I never willingly let into it anything that is going to undermine my walk with God. And basically, I follow Corrie ten Boom's motto, which you've probably heard. KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it simple, stupid. I am not interested in complications. I am not interested in being profound. I just want to be understood. Sometimes people come to me and say, Brother Prince, that was a deep message. I said, Lord, what did I do wrong now? When we can learn to swim, let's begin to be deep. But most of us at the present moment would be out of our depth. We'd drown if we got into the depth.